You're live.
Great. Good morning, everyone. I'm Paul Meyer from GenAI Insights, and welcome to our daily GenAI executive briefing, where we discuss and rate top news items. Our team of AI analysts rate each article as essential, important, or optional for executives and leaders. We aim to get this done in 15 minutes, and it helps you be smarter to your boss, your management team, and your clients. Today's discussion is sponsored by GAI Insights, and will be led by David.
All right. Thanks, Paul. Good morning, everybody. So we have a couple of articles today where we'll talk about some new product releases aimed at financial services. We have a few interesting studies, one new one on the impact of on work that generative AI will have. And we will get started with this article where we have crowned another tech unicorn. If you guys can mute, I have a little background noise on somebody. So, Paul, what do you think about this newest unicorn?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's for our audience, it's optional. It's another speeds and feeds and more money, but I think for discussion, it's notable for a few things. One, the valuation went from 100 million to a billion in 6 months. Two, this is another example of a small team doing quickly gain scale. So they started in 2022, 2 years ago, and their beta only came out a year ago. I think the other thing that we all know, or many of us know, Levan so they have really good text to speech. I think that's interesting is that they're also starting to do speech to speech, where you talk in and then it modifies your voice. So I think this multimodal example in and out. And then last thing I've just been notable. I mean, we saw a few days ago that OpenAI censored its first developer for elections, and these guys have also started censoring people from using their technology for nefarious things. So it's another example of the challenge here. But that's all my commentary, but optional is my rating.
All right. Anybody else have any thoughts or disagreement? Tim, you're on mute. I see your lips moving, though.
I agree. Voice is super important. I think people radically underestimate how important it's going to be going forward. But optional, I would say optional.
Tim, just one thing on that. I thought Ethan Mullick had a good comment the other day that he's been noticing that people who use voice to ChatGPT are doing longer and more elaborate prompts,
Right.
which makes a lot of sense. You're talking to it like a machine or another person.
Plus, it's just one more way of expanding access. You don't even have to know how to write or type.
Yeah. All right. So we'll go optional, but solid company we know with a really good offering. So next up, thank you. So this is a new offering from Bloomberg. They have a tool that summarizes earnings reports. It's got a couple of nice features in it. Tanya, what did you think about this one?
Yeah, I mean, I thought this was super interesting, right? Bloomberg has been on the cutting edge of a lot of this AI technology, right? They came up with their GPT before many other companies were even knew what GPT was. So I marked it important because I think that the earning call summary provides another level of research to the people that are using it that is much quicker, right? So you don't have to, listen to a whole session. You don't have to read a whole big, huge document. It is giving you the highlights. But the important thing is that they are training it so that it doesn't give you, mistaken information. So I marked it important from that perspective because they're definitely a leader in this, and they've definitely devoted a lot of time and resources and money to ensuring that the products that they put out there, are going to be, good products, good quality.
Yeah, one nice feature in here they have is that you can actually click on portions of the summary and get to the actual text in the earnings call. So I think it's just a good feature to note that's possible here. So we have a vote for important. Any detractors there?
I'll jump in. I rated it optional at first, and as I hear you all talking, I do understand that this is an important step more generally in terms of people or businesses applying that extra layer of value on top of it. I was like, how is this different than just someone uploading the transcript and giving everyone a link? But as you highlight some of those other capabilities and the really targeted, almost applied use cases within the tool that they're giving to their business, it's important to understand this value add that this kind of implementation really brings to market.
I would just also emphasize important for a person who's listened to hundreds of these, the gold is in the Q&A. Where the analysts ask tough questions and put the CEO or the CFO on the spot, but that's always buried way down. So the ability to go get easily the Q&A for a top 4 or 5 competitors and get that summarized in a thing that's sent across the management teams, I think is really important for AI leaders to know and make sure they're taking advantage of that if they work at a publicly traded company.
All right. So
And David, if I can just add one other thing. What's interesting is what they're doing for fintech, right? We're seeing it. There's that other article on GRC tech, and we're also seeing it in other articles that we've reviewed, legal tech, right? So this idea of really experts in a specific sector putting in their IP, I mean, that is really, the secret sauce.
all right.
Let me make one quick comment. I think actually the application is fairly straightforward and not that exciting, but this is like McDonald's, like the Epic EHR example we saw yesterday. This is a major institution in production with a very, very important set of constituents. This is not trivial. So that to me was the most interesting thing here.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks. Let's move on. Sorry, John, I'm going to cut you off just to keep on. You are up next.
Yeah, I think I'd put this as optional, but man, this is an important area. The idea of using, a model office with a chatbot on top of it to help with financial compliance for wealth managers and so forth. I mean, you got to remember that the wealthiest generation in history is passing on their assets. Some of the estimates run between 25 trillion and 65 trillion is going to get transferred over the next 10 to 15 years, depending upon how long the boomers live. And the idea of regulatory compliance at the coalface with these wealth managers is a huge issue. And as I mentioned before, when I was working at PwC, the bills for folks like UBS and Northern Trust and so forth, just to make sure that they're complying, and to have a tool. I mean, if you pop up a level and you think about, the auditors can now go to the regulators and say, look, here's the transcripts, here's the logic, right? And so you can actually, I think over time, these will actually be part of the audit process to show that you're in financial regulatory compliance. And that's a big deal in a bunch of industries, certainly financial services. So I'd say optional, but the topic is essential.
Yeah, and just to note, this particular tool seems like it's obviously it's for the UK, so geared to their compliance needs. It's got the Financial Conduct Authority handbook that it's memorized. So thanks, John. Optional is the vote here. Any other thoughts or push for important for any reason?
Well, Dave, I'm going to go for the trend being important for small businesses. And I know the audience that we're talking to is mid-market and above. But for smaller companies, that don't have, right, the budget to have a GRC expert on their staff, right, to have a tool like this where they can pay a monthly subscription is going to be, pretty important for them. And then I was going to say, I think we're showing the Bloomberg article right now instead of the model. Model one.
Let's see. Are we? Yeah. Sorry, you're right.
So I'm okay with optional for the audience that we have, but I think it's an important trend for smaller companies that cannot afford a GRC expert on their staff.
Yeah, I know people are muting me as if that's my dog, but just note my dog is a Chihuahua, does not make that noise. It makes a lot more high-pitched noise than that. You'll hear it one day, I'm sure, and regret it, but not that one. Okay, so we have optional, and thanks, Akash. Here's the actual article. Anybody else have any comments or think that this is important for any reason? All right, we will move on. Thank you. So our next article is about Google teaching a generative AI tool to say, I don't know, which is something that it does need to be taught, right? Because one of the flaws is that it's confidently will say the wrong answer. So Tim, what were your thoughts on this?
So this is interesting but optional. First of all, it's a research piece by Google. Interesting if they can make models more likely to be cautious about their conclusions, or at least offer confidence levels, which is effectively what this is doing. Also, if you actually click through and read the article, you'll find out very quickly their improvement isn't that great on the tests that they're using. And the third thing is, again, the real issue is, okay, if I need the right answer, most people have trouble defining the right answer and defining confidence intervals. So if it's, if I'm doing a health diagnosis, most people don't want to take any chances, although obviously there's some confidence level in a human being making a health diagnosis, but most people want zero level of chance from an AI system. So there's work to be done here, and even just the definition of what it is. But the real issue is this thing is research, interesting to read, but not a dramatic improvement in performance, even by their own measures.
If I can, what in 2001 at AT&T Wireless, we implemented a Bayesian network that was all about confidence levels and whether it would auto reply or send it to a support agent, depending how sure it was that it knew they were asking about, shipping times or whatever the question might be. And that was just trained on a bunch of historical data. And so I think it's important to have a lever, right? It's important to build models that have some gauge of that. So that even if you're setting it at 99.9%, we need some way to trigger when the AI does it and when the human needs to be deferred to. And that's what that I don't know moment can trigger. So again, to your point, it might be 99.9% confident, but it enables us to let the AI sometimes, if it's sure, just move forward without our intervention. So it's important for automation. But generally, this news itself, I would agree, is optional. It's quite early still.
I'd like to add, it's just because we had multiple conversations about it. Tim, I really like the word confidence level, because part of MBT seems how much ground truth you actually think's in the data. So we think about the major airlines we had a call with and the fintech company, where there is a lot more ground truth in that. And it was really hard for me last night in a learning lab when they were doing the of the 700 resumes, show me the 10 best. I think if you took 10 HR people and had them try to agree on what the 10 best resumes are, I don't know if they would get to a ground truth there.
Absolutely. Yep. The most of the problem, once you get into semantics, is definitional.
All right, so we will go optional, but at some point we'll probably transition to important, I'm hearing. By the way, just a side note, this article, and I think there were a couple more today and a couple yesterday, as a heavy Mid-Journey user, you can see that a lot of these organizations are starting to adopt that tool and use it for their imagery, because it's got a fairly distinct style that I have been recognizing. So just interesting to note. But okay, so we go optional on this, and let's move on. We've got two more. The next one is a new study from MIT that's looking at the effect of generative AI on jobs, and it's actually a bit of a counterpoint to some of the ones that we've seen, although it's limited in scope. So they looked at jobs that are visual, so they would be affected by computer vision technology, and they found that fewer jobs have the potential for full automation. I think they said 23%. I didn't get to spend a lot of time with this one, but 23% of jobs exposed to visual tasks have the potential to be automated. And they actually did, some economic modeling of it, and showed that in a lot of cases, the cost to deploy a system would make it not worthwhile to automate it versus using a human. And John, I know you're always interested in these stories. Did you get to?
Yeah, sure. I think we should have an agreement at MIT that people from the computer science lab shouldn't do economics, and the economists won't write any code. This is a ridiculous study. It's totally optional. It takes a small part of visual. It takes current states. It takes visual only. The 23% is visual inspection of certain activities. And then they make a good headline. But this is such a whatever. It's a ridiculous study. I do think that people forget their common sense in this stuff. Look, it's not that all the jobs are going to be gone tomorrow. There'll probably be an increase in jobs as people are analyzing it and figuring out what's going on. The question is, what happens over time? What happens in 3 years, 5 years? As market leaders who adopt this stuff and have a new business model that has different labor economics than the traditional business model, that's when it hits. So it's not, in our writings, it's not happening next year. We're saying 3 to 5 years because that's how long it's going to take. The way the existing firms are going to get competed away is that people use this stuff to drive a different business model, which will force the incumbents to then change. That's generally how it happens, And so, anyway, not a good study. Great headline. Totally optional.
And it's also noted that IBM sponsored this study, by the way.
Yeah. David, I want to do a shout out to Michael Novak, who's on watching. So good morning, Michael. And also Jason Everbook. Jason, good to hear your voice. It's been many years. I just put the nothing burger on this one as well. I think these studies are absolutely useless. I don't even know what a policymakers would do this or businesses. So I think this is more clickbait stuff.
Okay. We give it a U for useless and also the big O for optional. And we'll go on to our next one. Once in a while, for the folks watching, we'll pull up an interesting piece of research to discuss it, even though it may not be immediately applicable. So this piece of research that we're pulling up is about a new way to train models, basically using a different reward technique where the model kind of rewards itself. I can probably defer to Adam on this one to explain it a little in more depth, as it's a little technical.
No, man, I'd agree. It's optional. It's really interesting, but again, in some ways, it's not very surprising. I don't know. It makes sense that we saw that in some studies, even like last March, April, I think, in some of the early experiments, where when you told it that it would get a reward, right, it performed better. I mean, I have in my custom instruction to tell GPT every time I give it an instruction that if it does a good job, I'll tip it $2,000. And there's research that shows offering it a tip, we've reviewed it before, I believe, will actually produces better results. So in some ways, this just seems like kind of an extrapolation on that theory. It's interesting, though, that they actually have some numbers around it, and they can see really, like, demonstrably how, in this case, providing this high quality reward to Llama 2 actually enabled to meet and exceed some of the other tools out there, like one of the earlier GPT-4s and Gemini Pro. So it's very interesting, but it is something that's been continuing to progress, and certainly optional in terms of news because it is just research.
All right, Tim, any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree on the optional part. I would say, I think we've said this before. If you want me to be a little pithy, I think OpenAI is a move fast and break things, classic Silicon Valley that pushed its product out way before it really understood it well. And as a result, it's sort of held together by whatever happened to be running at the time they released it. And there's lots of opportunities for improvement. So this is one opportunity that, as Adam noted, the most interesting thing is they got up to pretty good levels of performance by, again, their benchmark comparisons, but they're not terrible, with very little effort. And on a Llama model, as opposed to these enormously expensive OpenAI and Claude and Gemini models. So that's what's interesting. I think the room here for low-hanging fruit is vast. And we'll see lots of efforts like this. Some of them I think undoubtedly will prove transformational, not to make a pun, to the industry.
Michael is saying he hasn't read it fully yet, but it says after LLM is trained, its data is static. What am I missing?
And I just replied to comment. They do a fine tuning. So the static model is the Llama 2 70 billion parameter, but then they fine tune on top of that and do this reinforcement training, and that's what is making it a different model,
Right.
than on top of that static base model.
Right.
I agree that article's optional. For me, the implication for the AI leader is the cost of lock-in is very high because you have very different, performance going on with the different models and so forth. So I think making sure that you don't get locked into a model as much as you can is incredibly important, because the performance of these different models is going to change a lot over the next 36 months.
Amanda, what are your thoughts? I just one more comment before we close it up would be great.
So I just had one thought, but you'd kind of have to pull it out if you don't really know too much about the DPO. So one thing I find interesting, and I don't know how much it really dived in per this research, but the ability to control sentiment that comes out of some of the content that's generated using that method seems to be improved against other models, at least per what I've read. So that, but again, you kind of have to be technical to pull that out. But that's something I just wanted to note about DPO in general. But that's
Amanda, what
I
is
say this
DPO?
is optional as well.
What is DPO?
That direct preference optimization, basically.
Go ahead. Direct preference optimization. So, you have all these different kinds of feedback loops. The most common one is, the human reinforcement one? That's the most common one, but that takes humans, and of course it's complicated to get the preferences to be consistent. This is attempting to create preferences that the model itself can generate hypotheses for, and then test those hypotheses and do its own A/B testing effectively.
Got it. All right. Thanks, everyone. This was a good discussion as usual. It looks like we came out with just one important article, which was the one that Tanya talked about, Bloomberg's new earnings call summarizer. Thanks, everyone, for joining. And Paul, how was the Learning Lab last night? And maybe just let folks know that.
Thank you, David. Learning Lab was great. The topic was implementing enterprise-safe enterprise GenAI with a RAG architecture. So we had a really good discussion led by Lucinda. Her use case I mentioned earlier was having large language models pull out the top 10 resumes of 700. And that's a little more subjective, but it was definitely a good learning thing. I thought it was interesting. It was just the way the market is. I've now had 3 companies ask for the video recording of that session because they couldn't make it. So I think this idea of, and literally, John and I were on a call yesterday with a large pharmaceutical company, and he literally said, everything's moving so fast. I need very specific pieces of information. And one of the ones he wanted was, what does enterprise safe RAG look like? Because they're now just starting thinking about it, because he's a assigned AI leader, now starting to understand this technology here. So this kind of basic one-on-one learning is something that I'm seeing more in the marketplace. And yesterday was a good step towards that.
And our GAI Insights page on LinkedIn, is there a way to sign up for the community calls there?
That is a good question. I'll have to check on that. Thank you, David.
That's on the website.
One of the many missing loops here. Yes.
All right, we'll make it real then. So we'll put up on our LinkedIn how you can join the Learning Labs with us and our full community. We'll do that today. So thanks, everybody. We will see you tomorrow morning, same time, 7:30. Have a great day.